You ever look at your own hands and realize they built everything you've lost? That was me, standing in the kitchen that still smelled of my late wife's apple pie, listening to my grandsons argue upstairs about who'd get the old man's truck once I was finally gone. They didn't know I could hear them, or maybe they did. Maybe that was the point. I'm Tom, 73 years old, retired carpenter. The kind of man who still irons his work shirts even though he doesn't have anywhere to go. For 48 years, I built houses for other people, strong, steady homes for families to grow in. Then I built this one, with my own two hands, for my son and his boys. Now it's the place they're trying to bury me in before I'm even dead. I used to think betrayal was something strangers did to you. Turns out it wears your last name and calls you Grandpa when company's over. It started small, like rot beneath fresh paint. My eldest grandson, Chase, started managing my bills after Martha passed. "You shouldn't worry about paperwork, Grandpa," he'd said, all confidence and cologne. "Just enjoy retirement." So I did, or tried to, until I noticed strange mail disappearing from the counter. Then my checkbook went missing altogether. He said he was setting up automatic payments. Funny how automatic meant my pension stopped reaching me and started reaching him. When I asked about it, he laughed. "You're overthinking again, Grandpa? We just reorganized things for tax reasons." Tax reasons. My life had become one big write-off. The younger one, Eric, was worse. Lazy, angry, full of that kind of arrogance that comes from never being told no. He'd use my truck like it was his birthright, leave beer cans rolling under the seat. And when I asked him to fill the tank, he said, "You don't even drive anymore. What's it matter?" What it mattered was respect, and that had run out faster than my gas. I tried to remind myself they were Martha's grandsons, my blood. She would have told me to be patient, but patience feels a lot like cowardice when you're the only one still saying thank you in your own house. Then one night, I overheard the conversation that snapped something inside me. They didn't know I was sitting on the porch, the window open behind me. Chase was whispering to his brother. "We get him to sign the sale papers after Thanksgiving," he said. "The lawyer said it's just a formality since Dad's on the deed too. Once it sells, we split it 3 ways." Eric laughed. "You think he'll sign?" "He will," Chase said. "He's too tired to fight. Old men always are." I remember gripping the armrest until the wood cracked under my fingers. They thought I was tired. Maybe I was. But I wasn't finished. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Martha's photo, that same soft smile that used to fix everything. "You'd know what to do," I whispered. "You always did." But she didn't answer. So I did what I'd always done when something broke. I looked for the weak joint, the hidden nail, the truth beneath the paint. First thing in the morning, I drove my truck, the one they thought I was too old to handle, down to the county office. My name was still on every deed, every title, every record. Turns out my son never removed me when he refinanced. I wasn't some confused relic living on borrowed kindness. I was the legal owner of everything they stood to inherit, the house, the land, even the workshop they used for their little side hustle. They'd been building their empire on my foundation, without realizing I still held the ground. That's when the idea came, cold, precise, like the sound of a saw blade catching perfect rhythm. Revenge doesn't need rage, it just needs timing. For a week, I played the fool, smiled, nodded, let Chase brag about future plans. Let Eric strut around like he already owned the place. They even joked at dinner about upgrading the old house once it was theirs. I chewed slow, let them think the hearing aid muffled more than it did. But late at night, I packed boxes, Martha's letters, my tools, the photo albums they'd left to gather dust, and one folder they didn't know existed. The original mortgage documents, signed and notarized, naming me sole proprietor after Martha's death. Proof that this house was mine until I said otherwise. On the 8th day, I called an old friend, Robert Lane, my lawyer from the days I still had business to lose. "Tom," he said, voice warm as ever, "you finally ready to write that will?" "Not exactly," I told him. "I'm ready to sell." He hesitated. "You're sure? That place—" "Not the place," I interrupted. "The lesson." By Friday, the paperwork was ready. I sold the property to a private buyer, quietly, legally, fully. on the condition that I could stay 30 days before vacating. The offer was generous, more money than I'd ever see again, enough to start fresh somewhere small, quiet, mine. Saturday morning, the boys came home to a sold sign in the yard. Chase's car screeched to a stop so hard gravel flew across the driveway. "Grandpa!" he shouted, storming onto the porch. "What the hell is this?" I looked up from my coffee. "Looks like you'll need to start packing." "You can't do this. We were supposed to—" His face twisted, all entitlement and panic. "Dad's gonna lose it. Then he'll have company," I said. "I've been losing things for years. My wife, my health, my respect. Figured it was time you boys lost something too." Eric joined him, red-faced. "You're losing your mind. You can't just sell it." "Oh, I can," I said calmly, sliding the folded deed across the porch table. "Because it was never yours to begin with." For the first time, they looked small. Not like men, like scared boys who finally realized the house they'd been measuring for new furniture wasn't their inheritance, but a borrowed roof. "You'll regret this," Chase hissed. "Maybe," I said, standing, "but not as much as you'll regret thinking I wouldn't." When they left, slamming the door behind them, the house finally fell quiet. It wasn't peace exactly, just the echo of something close. The walls seemed to breathe again, free of their noise. I sat back down, the paper still warm from my hands, and felt Martha there beside me, proud maybe, or maybe just tired too. I don't know what comes next, but I know this much. The old man they tried to bury isn't done building yet, and somewhere in the distance I can already hear the sound of hammers again. When I woke up the next morning, the sold sign still stood in the yard, catching the early light like a flag of victory and shame all at once. I made coffee the way Martha liked it, black, strong enough to wake the dead, and sat by the window. The birds were quiet that morning. Maybe even they were waiting to see what I'd do next. I'd sold the house. That part was done. But the thing about revenge, real revenge, is it doesn't end when the papers are signed. It ends when the people who took you for granted start seeing themselves clearly in the mirror, and I wasn't sure my son or grandsons had looked there yet. The buyer was due at noon to finalize a few details. I hadn't met her in person yet, only spoken over the phone. Her name was Claire Thompson. Said she wanted a quiet property with a workshop and space for her teenage daughter. She'd paid in cash, full asking price, efficient, polite, respectful. Didn't haggle. That alone felt like a miracle. At exactly 12, a white SUV pulled into the drive. A woman stepped out, late 30s, practical clothes, hair tied back. The kind of confidence that doesn't come from money, but from survival. Behind her, a girl about 16 climbed out, headphones around her neck, eyes curious but cautious. I opened the door before they knocked. "Mr. Tom Baker?" the woman asked, extending her hand. "Claire, thank you for seeing us again before the move." Her grip was firm. I liked that. "Just Tom," I said. "The house is yours now." She looked past me into the entryway, where sunlight hit the old wood floors I'd laid by hand decades ago. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Feels honest. Honest." That word stuck. "Most things built by hand do," I replied. "No secrets under these boards." Her daughter smiled faintly. "I like it," she said. "Smells like sawdust and cinnamon." Martha would have liked that girl. We walked through the rooms together. Claire asked questions about plumbing, roof maintenance, insulation. She knew what she was doing. I pointed out small quirks, how the back door stuck in humid weather, where the rain pooled in spring. She took notes, listening carefully. Not once did she speak over me or act like an old man's advice was useless. That alone set her miles apart from the family I'd just outsmarted. When we reached the workshop, I paused at the doorway. It still smelled like motor oil and pine. My tools hung in neat rows, the only part of my life untouched by their hands. "This was my world," I said quietly. "Every nail, every beam in this house started here." Claire nodded. "Then it's not just a workshop," she said. "It's a monument." Her words caught me off guard. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened the way it does when memory sneaks up on you uninvited. "I'll leave it to you as is," I managed. "You'll make good use of it." She smiled. "My father was a carpenter, too. He'd be grateful knowing another set of calloused hands built the place we're gonna live. Something inside me softened, like wood catching sunlight after a long winter. Maybe this house wasn't dying after all. Maybe it was being reborn. When they left, I stood alone on the porch, watching the dust trail fade. Then, in the distance, another car appeared, a sleek black sedan I recognized instantly. My son, Mark. He parked hard enough to rattle the mailbox, slammed the door, and marched up the steps. "What the hell have you done, Dad?" he barked. Chase called me in a panic. I stayed seated. "Morning to you too, son. You sold the house without talking to me. Do you have any idea what kind of mess this creates?" "Not a mess for me," I said. "Maybe for the ones who plan to steal it." His face flushed. "They're your grandsons." "They're thieves with better shoes," I replied. "And you're the father who raised them that way." That hit him. I saw it. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like he used to as a teenager when he got caught lying about report cards. "You don't understand," he said finally. "They were counting on that money. We all were." "Money?" I repeated slowly. "That's all any of you talk about. When did it stop being a home and become a price tag?" He sighed. "Dad, the boys are young." "No," I cut in. "They're grown. Old enough to betray family for profit. Don't tell me it's youth. It's greed, and I've seen enough of it to last me a lifetime." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the man in front of him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. "You could have just talked to me," he said quietly. "We'd have figured something out." Talking stopped working a long time ago, Mark. Every time I said no, you all heard maybe. Every boundary I set turned into a challenge. You wanted the house. I wanted respect. Turns out only one of us could afford what we wanted. He looked like he might say more, then didn't. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and went back to his car. But halfway down the steps, he turned. "So, where will you go?" I looked past him at the hills beyond the road. "Anywhere that doesn't echo with disappointment." He drove off without another word. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a soft knock came at the door. It was Claire again, holding a small box. "You left this in the workshop," she said, handing it over. Inside was Martha's old wooden ruler, the one she used when helping me with measurements all those years ago. I'd forgotten it on the workbench. "Guess it belongs with the house now," I said. She shook her head. "No. Some things belong to the hands that built them." Her kindness hit harder than any argument. After she left, I sat on the porch till the stars came out, ruler in my lap, heart heavier than I wanted to admit. For the first time in years, the night felt quiet. Not empty, just calm. I should have been relieved, but there was a hollow in my chest that even victory couldn't fill. Maybe revenge feels sweet only until you swallow it. I looked at the sold sign again. Soon it would come down, replaced by something new. I wondered what Claire and her daughter would build here. Maybe laughter, maybe forgiveness. Both things this house had forgotten. But as I watched the porch light flicker in the wind, another thought crept in. A question that wouldn't leave me alone. If the house was finally free, why did I still feel trapped? The answer came the next morning in the form of a letter slipped under the door. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, and marked with a seal I hadn't seen in 20 years. Baker & Sons Construction. My old company. I opened it slowly. The letter inside was short. "Tom, heard you sold the old place. I've been looking for a partner who still believes in building things the right way. One last project, for old time's sake. Call me if you're interested. Robert Lane." I stared at the words until they blurred. Maybe the world was offering me one last blueprint, not for a house, but for a life I thought was finished. And just like that, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. I didn't sleep that night. The letter from Robert sat on the table beside my coffee mug, the ink catching light from the single lamp, like it wanted to be read again and again. One last project, he'd written. One last chance to feel like I was building something that mattered instead of just cleaning up the ruins. It had been almost 20 years since I'd walked away from Baker & Sons Construction. Back then, my knees were good, my hands steady, and the company was small, just me, my boy Mark, and a few men who worked like family. But when Martha's health began failing, I chose to stay home, and Mark chose to chase bigger contracts. That's when the heart left the business. It grew richer, but colder. I never blamed him then. Maybe I should have. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't done, not yet. I called Robert right after breakfast. He answered on the first ring, same gravel voice I remembered from the job site. "You old ghost," he said. "Didn't think I'd hear from you this soon." "You shouldn't dangle work in front of a man who still dreams in blueprints," I told him. He chuckled. "Glad to hear you still have fire in you. You up for a drive?" "Where to?" "An old church out by Pine Hollow. Needs restoring. The town wants to turn it into a community center. They need someone who understands wood, not just profit margins." I looked out the window. The morning light made the fields shimmer. "I'll be there in an hour." The truck started on the second try, coughing like it hadn't forgiven me for months of neglect. I patted the dashboard. "Come on, old friend. One more job." The road to Pine Hollow was quiet. I passed familiar sights, a diner that still had the same neon sign flickering, the bridge I'd built after the flood of '92, the field where Mark used to play baseball before life got complicated. It all felt like a ghost town, built from my own memories. When I reached the church, Robert was waiting, leaning against his pickup. He looked older, but strong, like a tree that had weathered every storm and decided to keep standing out of spite. "Looks worse than I remember," I said, staring at the sagging roof and cracked steeple. "Yeah," he said, grinning. "Perfect for two stubborn old men who refused to retire." Inside, the air smelled like dust and hope. The floorboards creaked under my boots, but the bones of the place were solid. Sunlight spilled through broken stained glass, scattering colors across the pews. I could already see it, new beams, polished floors, the laughter of kids echoing off the walls again. A second life for something forgotten. "This place reminds me of me," I muttered. Robert laughed. "Then we better start before it collapses." We worked until noon, measured, sketched, argued over lumber types, just like the old days. For the first time in months, my hands felt useful. Every hammer strike steadied something inside me that had been shaking since Martha died. Around lunchtime, a familiar voice broke the rhythm. "Grandpa?" I turned. Chase stood in the doorway. Wearing that expensive jacket he thought made him look like a man. For a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Then it vanished behind arrogance. "What are you doing here?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands. "Dad told me you were working on some project," he said. "He's worried, said you might be losing it." "Losing it?" I repeated, smiling faintly. "Looks to me like I finally found it again." He frowned, glancing around the old church. "You sold your house, Grandpa. Where are you even living?" "In my truck for now," I said casually. "Got everything I need. Tools, clothes, freedom." "Freedom?" He laughed without humor. "You call this freedom? You should have stayed home where we could take care of you." "Take care of me?" I said slowly. "You mean take from me." He stiffened. "That's not fair." "Neither is stealing," I said. "But fairness stopped mattering when you started signing my name on checks." His jaw clenched. "Dad said you're being dramatic. We were just trying to help." "Then help by learning something," I said, picking up a chisel. "See this? A clean cut takes patience. You rush it, you ruin the whole board. Life's the same way, son. You all rushed it. Tried to carve your future out of someone else's work. And now, it's splintered." He didn't answer, just stood there, staring at the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Finally, he muttered, "Dad says you embarrassed the family." I laughed, quiet, tired, but real. "Son, I built that family, brick by brick. If they're embarrassed, that's on them." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "What if we want to fix it?" I looked at him for a long time. "Then show up with a hammer. Not excuses." He didn't. Not that day anyway. When he was gone, Robert clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled that better than I would have." "I wasn't talking to him," I said. "I was talking to the man he might still become." By dusk, we'd cleared half the debris. My back ached, my hands trembled, but my heart was steady. For the first time since Martha's funeral, I felt proud of something again. As we packed up, Robert looked over. "You know, the town's planning a rededication ceremony once this is done. They're naming it after someone who's given back." I smiled. Well, that narrows it down to everyone but me. He grinned. Don't be so sure. Driving back that night, I stopped by my old house, Claire's house now. The porch light was on, glowing warm. Through the window, I saw her daughter sitting at the table, painting. Claire was laughing at something, her hair falling loose. The house looked alive again, like it had forgiven the years of bitterness. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. Peace. Maybe the house didn't need me anymore. Maybe that was the point. I was about to drive away when the girl noticed me through the window. She waved, smiling. Then she held up her drawing. A picture of the house, perfectly sketched, a small figure sitting on the porch with a dog at his feet. It took me a second to realize she'd drawn me. That's when I knew Martha would have liked her too. I drove off into the night, the road humming beneath me. Tomorrow, I'd be back at the church, hammer in hand, building something new. Not for my sons or my grandsons, but for the strangers who still believed in the kind of work you could touch, smell, and trust. Revenge had given me closure, but creation was giving me purpose again. And maybe that's the truest kind of revenge there is, showing the ones who doubted you that you can rebuild your life with nothing but your own 2 hands. The smell of fresh-cut pine always takes me back to when I first started building houses, that clean, sharp scent of possibility. By the 3rd week at the church, it had soaked into my clothes, my hands, my hair, like it was trying to remind me who I really was before the family, before the bitterness, before everything went wrong. We'd replaced half the roof by then. Robert handled the heavy beams while I measured and sanded, slower than I used to, but still precise. The ache in my knees was constant, but I didn't mind. Pain meant I was alive, meant I was still capable of something. Every evening, after the day's work, I'd sit on the steps out front and watch the sun spill over the fields. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the quiet. The silence didn't mock me anymore. It listened. Then, one afternoon, as the sky turned the late summer gold, a black sedan pulled up again, the sound of tires on gravel. I didn't need to turn around. I already knew who it was. My son stepped out first. Mark. Behind him, Chase and Eric. The same trio that had once tried to corner me with paperwork and false smiles. This time, though, they looked different, smaller. Maybe the world had started teaching them the lessons I couldn't. Mark hesitated at the base of the church steps. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I rested the hammer on my knee. "Depends what language you're using today, money or truth." He sighed. "We came to apologize." Robert looked up from the scaffolding and caught my eye. I nodded, and he took the hint to give us space. He disappeared inside, leaving me alone with the 3 ghosts of my bloodline. Chase was the first to speak. "We messed up," he said, voice low. "I messed up. I thought I was helping the family. I thought—" He stopped, glancing at his brother. Eric picked up the thread. "We thought you were done, Grandpa. You were quiet all the time, sitting around the house like you'd already given up. We figured it'd be better to take over before things got worse." "Take over," I repeated, "like a hostile business merger." Eric winced. "Yeah, pretty much." Mark stepped forward, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. "I should have stopped them. I didn't. You worked your whole life to build something honest, and we treated it like a paycheck waiting to happen. I'm sorry." Silence stretched between us. For years I'd dreamed of hearing those words, but now that they'd finally been spoken, they didn't feel like I expected. They didn't fix anything. They just opened old wounds that never healed right. "Do you know what I used to tell your mother, Mark?" I said. "That I wanted our family to stand for something. Not wealth, not status, integrity. I wanted my kids and grandkids to carry that name with pride. But somewhere along the line, you started confusing success with decency." Chase swallowed hard. "We know, Grandpa. We see that now." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because words are easy. You boys learn to say the right ones early. What matters is what comes after." Mark looked up. "What do you want us to do?" I gestured toward the pile of lumber stacked by the door. "Grab a hammer." For a moment, they just stared at me. Then Chase, to his credit, nodded and walked over. He picked up a hammer like it weighed more than it should. Eric followed, slower, unsure. Mark hesitated, then joined them. And just like that, For the first time in decades, we worked together. They were clumsy at first, soft hands from soft lives, nails bent, boards split. I didn't say a word. I just watched, let them sweat, let them feel the stubborn weight of honest work. By the time the sun dipped low, we'd replaced 3 rotten floorboards and reinforced a section of wall. Nothing spectacular, but to me, it was more valuable than any mansion. When we finished, Chase leaned on the hammer, breathing hard. "How did you do this for 50 years? Because, I said, when you build something with your hands, it doesn't just hold weight, it holds meaning. They didn't answer. They just looked around the church, eyes softer now, maybe even ashamed. As dusk fell, Claire's white SUV rolled up outside. She stepped out with her daughter, carrying a box of sandwiches. "Thought you boys might be hungry," she said with a smile. I introduced her to my family. "This is Claire. She owns the old house now." Mark blinked. "The one you sold?" "That's right," she said. "Your father built it. I'm just trying to do right by it." Her tone wasn't proud, it was grateful. That simple grace disarmed them more than my anger ever could. They all sat down on the steps together. The food was simple, turkey, mustard, and homemade pickles. But no one complained. We ate in silence, watching the horizon fade from gold to violet. It almost felt like the old days. Almost. When the stars began to show, Chase turned to me. "Grandpa," he said, voice quiet, "do you think you'll ever forgive us?" I thought about that for a long time. "Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through," I said finally. "It's a wall you climb. Some of you are still at the bottom, but you're looking up. That's something." Mark nodded. "We want to keep helping here, at the church." I met his eyes. "Then show up tomorrow morning, 6 sharp, no excuses." They did, every day that week. The first few mornings, I expected them to quit when the blisters came, but they didn't. Chase stopped wearing his expensive watch because the strap kept getting filthy. Eric learned how to plane wood without gouging it. Mark brought coffee for everyone and didn't complain when it was too hot. Slowly, the rhythm of work replaced the noise of resentment. Robert started calling them the Baker Boys, half mocking, half proud. I think he enjoyed seeing me teach again. One evening, as we packed up, Eric pulled me aside. "Grandpa," he said, "I didn't get it before, why you were so mad. But now, when I drive a nail and it fits perfect, it feels like it matters." I smiled. "That's because it does. It always did." He nodded, eyes shining in the dim light. "I want to learn more." And right there, for the first time in years, I believed maybe the blood running through this family wasn't cursed after all. But peace never lasts long. The world has a way of testing your progress. The following Friday, a black SUV rolled up again, but this time it wasn't family. 2 men in suits stepped out, clipboards in hand, and asked for me by name. The taller one adjusted his tie and smiled too politely. "Mr. Baker," he said, "we represent the developer interested in purchasing this property." I frowned. "This is a community project. It's not for sale." He smiled wider. "Everything's for sale, sir." Behind me, Mark and the boys froze. The man handed me a folder. Inside was an offer, 7 figures. Enough to buy a dozen new houses. Enough to make anyone think twice. Chase whistled under his breath. "That's a lot of money." I closed the folder without looking twice. "Not all things worth building can be bought," I said. The man smirked. "That's poetic. But money builds too." I handed him the folder back. "Not the kind of things that last." They left, their shiny SUV spitting gravel as it sped off. The air hung heavy after they were gone. Chase stared at the empty road. "You sure about that, Grandpa?" I looked up at the church, at the fresh wood glowing gold in the fading light. "If I've learned anything," I said, "it's that the best things in life aren't for sale. Not this place, not family, not me." But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Developers don't take no for an answer. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that old fire again. The one that built houses, raised sons, and now, maybe, would defend something sacred. The church wasn't just a building anymore. It was a promise. And I wasn't about to let anyone tear it down. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's smile. The kind of smile that knew how to buy anything. how to hollow out decency and sell the shell. I'd seen that look before, years ago, when a developer tried to buy up half our town after the flood, offered pennies for people's homes, then bragged about the revitalization. Funny word for erasing history. This church, it wasn't just old wood and nails anymore, it was a heartbeat, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it. At sunrise, I drove into town. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs only to early risers and guilty men. I stopped at the county records office, the same one where I'd confirmed my house sale weeks ago. The clerk recognized me. "Morning, Mr. Baker," she said, smiling. "Back to stir the dust again?" "Something like that," I said. "I need the property file for the Pine Hollow Church." She searched, then frowned. "Huh. Someone's already requested access this week. A real estate group from Denver. Big money. Denver." That meant the suits weren't bluffing. "Can you tell me who owns the deed?" She leaned closer. "The county, technically, but there's a restoration clause. It's supposed to be transferred to the town historical trust once renovation's complete. You're listed as a project contractor." That word, contractor, stirred something old in me. Pride, maybe, or purpose. I thanked her and left with copies of every document I could legally take. Back at the church, Robert and the boys were already there. Robert was sanding a beam. Chase was sweeping. Mark looked up when I walked in. "Dad, you okay?" I dropped the papers on the table. "We've got company coming back. Developers. They want this land." Eric frowned. "Why? It's a church in the middle of nowhere." "Exactly," I said. "No one fights for places like this anymore. That's what makes it easy to steal." Robert rubbed his chin. "We could talk to the town board, get them to secure the transfer early." "That's part of it," I said. "But this isn't just paperwork. This is personal." The boys exchanged glances. They were used to my speeches by now, but this one came from deeper down, the part of me that had built a life from dust and debt. "You all thought revenge meant selling my house," I said. "But this is what revenge really looks like. Building something good in the place where others would have built greed." They didn't say anything for a long while. Then Chase nodded. "So what's the plan, Grandpa?" I smiled. "We finish faster than they can buy." For 2 weeks we worked like men possessed, sunup to sundown. Mark handled calls to the town board, pushing through permits and paperwork. Robert roped in volunteers from his union. Even Claire showed up with coffee and sandwiches, her daughter painting murals on the inside walls. Bright colors, soft shapes, little pieces of life. And every evening, when the sun bled over the horizon, I'd look at the half-restored church and think, maybe this is what redemption looks like. Sawdust and sweat instead of apologies and lies. But peace never lasts long. On the 14th day, they came back. 2 black SUVs this time. Same suits plus a third man, their boss clearly. He was younger, clean-cut, expensive shoes that had never seen dirt. He walked toward me with the arrogance of someone who's never built anything but balance sheets. "Mr. Baker," he said, offering his hand. "Evan Grant, Horizon Development Group." I didn't take it. "You're wasting your time." He laughed softly. "Everyone says that, until they see the number." He opened his briefcase and slid a single sheet of paper onto the table we'd been using for blueprints. $2 million, for the property and all improvements. We'll even rename the development Baker Plaza in your honor. I looked down at the offer, then back at him. "You think my name's for sale too?" He didn't flinch. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Baker. You just haven't found yours yet." Mark stepped forward. "You need to leave." Evan smiled like a man humoring children. "You must be the son. Maybe you have more sense than your father." "Not today," Mark said. "Tomorrow then," Evan replied smoothly. "We'll come back. This offer expires in 48 hours. After that, the county might reconsider your permits. Paperwork can get complicated when you're not a priority." And just like that, they turned and left, engines humming like a warning. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Eric broke the silence. "Can they really do that?" Robert sighed. "They can try. Developers have friends in high places." Chase's face was pale. $2 million, Grandpa. That's enough to sell our souls twice," I said sharply. He shut his mouth. That night, I sat in the church alone, lights off, listening to the wind slide through the cracks. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Martha's photo sat beside me on the table. I took it from my wallet and whispered, "I thought revenge would end with me selling that house. But I was wrong. It's not about getting even. It's about standing up again." The next morning, I drove back into town, found the mayor's office open early. She was an old friend of Martha's, Helen Shaw, sharp as a chisel and twice as tough. "Tom Baker," she said, looking up from her desk. "Haven't seen you since the town parade. Heard you're building again." "Trying to," I said, handing her the papers. "But I need your help. Developers are sniffing around." She read quickly, eyebrows narrowing. "Horizon Group. Damn vultures. They've been buying farmland all over the county, turning it into luxury retreats." I leaned forward. "We can stop them. If the town accelerates the transfer, the property becomes heritage protected. They can't touch it." Helen tapped her pen on the desk, thinking. "That's risky. Requires a unanimous board vote." "Then get them to vote," I said. "You remember what this place means?" She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Still bossy, Tom." "Still right," I said. By that evening, she'd called an emergency meeting. I showed up in my cleanest flannel, smelling like sawdust and stubbornness. My sons and grandsons sat behind me. The developers sent lawyers in press suits, armed with smiles that looked carved by machines. The vote was close, 3-2. But when Helen raised her hand last, she looked right at me and said, "For the people who built this town before the money showed up. Unanimous. We won." Afterward, as the developers stormed out, Evan Grant stopped by my seat. "You think this is over, old man?" he hissed. I smiled. "No, son, this is just the first building block." He left, jaw tight. Outside, my family surrounded me. Eric hugged me first, then Chase. Even Mark, who hadn't hugged me since Martha's funeral. "Dad," he said quietly, "I get it now. It was never about the house, was it?" "No," I said, looking up at the stars. "It was about building something worth leaving behind." That night, we all returned to the church. Claire brought pie. Robert brought a bottle of something strong. The boys laughed, arguing about paint colors. For the first time, it didn't sound like noise. It sounded like legacy. As we sat there, the church bell, silent for 30 years, let out a low, shaky ring in the wind. It wasn't perfect. It was old, cracked, uneven, but it was alive, and so was I. The first bell rang at 7:03 a.m., 1 week after the town's vote. It startled the birds out of the rafters and woke half the valley. The sound wasn't smooth. It trembled, cracked midway like a voice breaking through tears. But it was real. It hadn't rung since the summer of 1989. Back then, Martha and I stood right there on the grass with young Mark, listening as it tolled for the last service before the congregation disbanded. Now, almost 40 years later, it sang again, and this time, it was for something new. The second bell rang 10 minutes later, louder, steadier, as though the church itself had remembered what it was made for. I was already inside, sanding the altar steps when I heard it. Robert leaned against a beam, smiling like a proud father. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Thought that bell was rusted solid." "It was," I said. "Guess it just needed a reason." That morning, something shifted. It wasn't just the sound, it was what it carried, a feeling that maybe, somehow, the old stories were ready to start again. By noon, townspeople began showing up. They had heard the bells and followed the sound like moths to a lantern. Retired farmers, shopkeepers, kids on bikes, faces I hadn't seen in decades. Some of them looked older than I remembered, some just the same. "What's going on, Tom?" one of them asked. "Is the church open again?" "Not yet," I said, "but soon." They didn't leave, they stayed. Some brought tools, others brought paint. One woman brought a tray of biscuits and a coffee thermos the size of a bucket. By sundown, it wasn't just me, Robert, and my family working anymore. It was half the town. And I'll tell you something. Watching people rebuild together after years of letting pride tear them apart, it's the closest thing to redemption I've ever seen. We worked until dark. Chase and Eric helped install new glass panes, laughing with local teens like they'd known them forever. Mark handled the electrical rewiring with an old electrician from my generation. Even Claire's daughter climbed the steeple ladder to paint the trim sky blue. When the day was done, the church looked alive. Rough around the edges, sure, but alive. The windows glowed with lamplight, the bell tower stood proud again, and the laughter echoed where silence used to rule. Later that night, when the crowd thinned, I stayed behind alone. The place smelled of fresh varnish and dust, the scent of new beginnings. I sat on the front pew, Martha's ruler resting in my hands, tracing the same marks she'd carved when we first measured the beams all those years ago. "You'd love this, Martha," I whispered. "Even the noise. Maybe because of the noise." I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, dawn light was creeping through the new windows. That's when I saw it, a small brass plaque, freshly screwed onto the front wall. It read, "The Baker Community Hall. Dedicated to those who build, mend, and forgive." Below it, 3 signatures, Mark, Chase, and Eric. My throat tightened. I hadn't asked for it. Maybe that's what made it matter most. Around 8, Robert came in holding a newspaper. "Front page," he said, grinning. "Developers packed up and left. County's making the site permanent heritage status. You did it, Tom." I shook my head. "We did it," he chuckled. "You really think those boys are going to keep showing up every morning at 6? I smiled. "I don't need them to. They've already learned what I came here to teach." Just then, the door creaked open. Chase stepped inside, hair messy, eyes half awake. "Grandpa," he said, rubbing his neck. "The bell rang again. You hear it?" "I did," I said. "Twice." He looked up toward the tower, sunlight gleaming off the brass. "Why twice?" I smiled softly. "Once for the past," I said. "Once for what's coming." He thought about that for a while, then nodded. "Can I stay a while?" I handed him a hammer. "If you're here, you work." He laughed, but there was warmth in it this time. Real warmth, the kind that only grows after ruin. We spent the morning patching the floorboards together. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a word, it's a rhythm. The steady thunk-thunk of nails going where they belong again. At noon, the rest of the family showed up. Mark brought lunch. Eric carried paint cans. Claire and her daughter arrived with flowers to plant outside. By sunset, it wasn't just a church anymore. It was a home again. Not for me, not for one family, but for everyone who'd forgotten what community felt like. As we locked up for the night, Chase stopped beside me. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "you ever think about what you'll do next?" I looked out at the fading light. "This was next," I said. "After all the hurt, all the anger, this was the thing that made the rest make sense." He nodded slowly. "You think Grandma would have liked it?" I smiled. "She's probably up there rolling her eyes that I made the newspaper again." We both laughed. That night, when I finally left, I stood by my truck for a long while, staring at the old steeple silhouetted against the stars. The bell didn't ring again, but I didn't need it to. It had already said what it needed to say. Forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets or fireworks. It's quiet. It shows up in small, steady ways. A repaired beam, a hand extended, a family learning how to start over. As I drove away, gravel crunching under the tires, I caught a last glimpse of the church in the mirror. The windows were glowing warm, the cross steady against the night sky. And for the first time in my 73 years, I didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. I felt like one who'd finally rebuilt what mattered. The bell might ring again someday. Maybe when I'm gone. Maybe when some other tired old soul decides to pick up a hammer and keep building where I left off. But when it does, I hope they remember this. That even broken hands can build something beautiful again.